Hello, all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Coolbaugh. Today, I have me a very special guest, St. Gibson. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Oh, I'm awesome. Anytime I can talk to an author or creator, particularly on the weekend where I actually have time to. I'm actually like in a weird spot right now because I'm like between projects, so I'm really anxious to talk to you, and it always gets my creative brain flowing. So I actually have
Awesome.
writing time or anything yet. So it's always nice to get these a little bit early in the day for me because then it helps me later on. So it feels good to talk to somebody else about their work and kind of be reflective of my own. So it feels good to be able to have you on today and we'll get to talk about yours and learn as much as we can from you. So that sounds awesome.
Great.
And we'll start right there with that first question. What has your writing journey been like up until this point?
Oh gosh, I've been writing since I was really, really young. It was kind of always my favorite pastime and hobby. I grew up in the library and, my first computer I had in my room, I just like lived on that word processor, teaching myself how to type faster and to write stories. I distinctly remember being like quite young, like 8 or 9, and checking out the X-Men encyclopedia from the library and just like reading it cover to cover. And I
Yeah.
just like loved all the character information. And it's all just like soap opera, like in this alternate universe, they're married, but then they're divorced on Earth. And then, she like transported herself into the past. And like I loved that kind of stuff. So I started trying to write little superhero comics, and then I realized very quickly that I'm not a very good visual artist. So I just started writing stories, and I've been doing that pretty much ever since. I studied creative writing at the University of North Carolina at Asheville for my
Oh,
bachelor's
cool.
degree. I trained as a poet before I was trained as a long form fiction writer. And then I really just, I mean, this is my favorite way to connect with people and my favorite way to sort through my own thoughts and make something beautiful. And it's really, really gratifying. So I'm thrilled that I get to do this.
That's awesome. That's super cool actually to hear about your alma mater because I actually almost did my one of my master's programs there.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, because I was considering actually switching like from education into more of like creative writing and stuff like that. And originally I was going to move down there. I had some stuff that ended up keeping me in Michigan at the time, but so that's kind of funny. So I know right where that's at. My buddy and I were actually almost started a gym down there, and I was gonna almost got hired as a martial arts instructor down there.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
a triangle, yeah, of all the colleges and universities. So that's really cool. That's awesome. Well, it sounds like you got a really good, mixed background, in terms of, helping, in terms of your creative writing process.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious, because a lot of people, I think, we have so many people now I've interviewed where like some people, have a creative writing background and then other people don't. So I was just kind of curious, like, how has that helped you, do you think, in terms of like your current works?
I actually just got this question on Instagram, and I
Oh,
think it's
cool.
a great question about like, if you're considering maybe a creative writing program, either at the undergraduate or the graduate level, or even, like an intensive sort of workshop, is it quote unquote worth it? And for me, I really benefited from having deadlines and set space and structure to write and kind of build up that muscle. And there's also a lot of benefits of like sharing your work with other people and kind of learning how to critique well and to take critique well. But those are really not things that you need to pay a lot of money and commit a lot of time to doing. And I always want to impress upon people that a creative writing program is not a straight shot to publication if that is your end
Yeah.
goal. It really does not translate in any correlated way to you finding the right agent or indie publishing successfully or getting a trad deal. It really has to be something you do because you think, oh, this is probably going to benefit me personally and artistically. But I always warn people, like, it in my mind, it's really only worth it if you're not paying a lot for it. So like if you have scholarships and financial support, that can be great. And also just make sure that the kind of the pedagogy of the professors in the program are suited to you, because I also know a lot of people, and I've experienced some of this myself, who went through creative writing programs that really were not friendly to or just didn't have a lot to offer their particular genre or style.
Yep.
You could be an incredibly talented writer, but if what you want to do is write genre fiction and you're in a workshop that is really oriented towards literary fiction, and that kind of industry and network of people, you're probably not going to get that much out of it in the long term. And it might just cause kind of more friction and distance from your own style and the kind of stories you want to tell. So that's kind of my double-edged sword. Those are my caveats.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I did enjoy my program quite a bit. And I was happy that I did it. And I learned a lot. And then for fun fact, for grad school, I actually went to school to train to become an Episcopalian priest. And
Oh,
then
wow.
I realized I did not want to do that. And I kind of circled back around to that first love of writing at the end of grad school and really started to take it even more seriously and try to learn more about the industry and learn more about publication and put my work out there. So, it's a winding road of our lives to get to where we want to be, but if you stay flexible and take it as it comes, you'll probably surprise yourself.
I think that's the best way to put it, the winding road. Sometimes mine has been a long, winding, lonely road to
Yes.
publication and stuff like that. That's really funny. Yeah, but I think you make such a good point, particularly with programs. Obviously Brandon Sanderson's BYU program is,
Yeah.
directly correlated to, certain genres. But I do have to say, like, I'm a teacher, so I went to a couple professional developments and things. So there was one, they're like, oh, it's creative writing, you might like it. And I'm like, okay, but I was assuming that it wasn't going to be something in my genre, but I just had to fill the time. I was so surprised. The professor that was doing the professional development for us teachers in my county was absolutely amazing. And
That's
he's like, "What do you
awesome.
want to?" Yeah, I was like, "He goes, what do you want to do?" I'm like, "I want to write fantasy. Like, I want to do a dark fantasy. Had this idea. I want to spend time on doing this." So I literally got paid, technically not a lot by my district to take this thing. But he was an amazing creative writing teacher. The stuff that I wrote there was total garbage, but it has some good kernels that I'll probably take stuff from. But it was just so cool to be in a space where somebody was accepting of, what I wanted to write. So I think you make a really good point there. I think it's important to find the right people to help you with your creativity in those creative spaces. So I think that makes
Absolutely. But by all means, if you feel like you're being supported, you feel that, challenge and that electricity with your professor and the other people in the program, and it isn't going to be a huge financial burden, I think when those opportunities come, they can be really amazing.
Yeah, no, totally. No, it's super cool. So one of my favorite questions to ask people is, what genre or genres do you currently write in and why?
I really love all kind of speculative fiction, but I am very, very at home in the Gothic genre. So a
Oh,
lot of what I write ends up being Gothic romance or romantic fantasy with horror elements. I really kind of like that overlapping Venn diagram where romance and horror or the Gothic and fantasy touch. I find it to be really, really fertile soil for creativity. And it is funny because like sometimes I'll set out to really just do one piece of that Venn diagram, and then the other elements inevitably get woven in. Like
yeah,
if I try to sit down and just write a horror, it is going to become a romance as well. And if I try to just sit down and write a romance or like a fantasy adventure, there's going to be elements of the Gothic or of horror in it as well. But yeah, I think my writing also in general tends to be really character driven. I
mm,
love relationships. I love atmosphere. I love kind of those lush descriptions that transport you. I also love a good plot twist and a good climax and things like that as well. But I feel like my writing tends to be really character forward and grounded in relationships and the growth between the people in the story.
oh, it's awesome. I actually had a couple of romantasy authors early in season one, and somebody asked me, like, we kind of got in like a verbal sparring match about uh, fantasy and sci-fi. They're like, romance can't be in it. And I'm like, have you ever seen Star Wars? They're like, yeah, Empire Strikes Back is my favorite movie. I said, me too. I said, what does Han say to Leia when she says, I love you? He goes, I know. He goes, crap. I go, exactly. I
You know,
go,
exactly. It's such
it's
an
your moment.
iconic moment for that couple. Yeah.
Yep.
I remember being in, oh, who said this? I think it was a professor I had or someone like that. And we were talking about romance and they were like, even if you aren't a person that reads or watches like category romance or rom-coms and you don't really, consider yourself a big romantic in that way, probably some of the stuff that makes some of your favorite pieces of media more interesting and kind of more emotionally engaging is probably a romance arc. And I think
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the example they used was they were like, oh, my husband loves like the Bourne Identity movies, which like always kind of have this like thriller romantic suspense,
Yeah, yeah.
star-crossed action-packed love story woven into them, even though they're like, we're going to run across Europe and shoot guns and try to figure out who we are, but like the romance is a part of it. So I do like kind of playing with levels in that way, and some stories where the romance really takes front and center, and other stories where that element of love or found family or growing personal edges is a little bit in the background, but it's really always there with everything I write.
Oh, that's awesome. I love the aspect we are talking about the Venn diagram. I always call it the Oreo cookie.
Yeah.
I love the frosting and I love the cookie, but when you put them together, it's just so much better. So
Mm-hmm.
I think why would I loved Forgotten Realms growing up. Oh my goodness. There was just so many good authors, but I had actually had the pleasure, like Elaine Cunningham was so cool of an author to me, and I had actually gotten to interview Richard Byers, and he was one of the first authors that I met, that I got to talk to, and I was talking about like Elaine and his work where it's so cool where they combine different elements together, and I think that was the first time as a teenager that I had read somebody do that. And Richard does a lot of horror with fantasy and blends them together like really, really well into something very superb, I think. And I think he did that really well. And there's some indie authors that have done such a great job that I've read the last several years who've done the same. And I think it's cool when you can blend a couple different things together into one really interesting topic.
You just like unlocked a core memory for me. I don't know if you've heard of this book, because this was like right when I was like of the middle grade YA
Mhm.
readership. But the book that kind of did that for me and like melted my brain in the best way about using genres in different way was Poison by Chris Wooding.
Oh,
It's Have you
yeah.
heard of
Oh
this book?
man.
Yes, nobody remembers this book, but I
It just
loved
popped
it.
up in my timeline actually. Somebody had shared it and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to go back and reread it. I was just talking, it's somebody, it's so funny you said, I was just talking to somebody about that.
Yeah, no, it's core memory. And for the listeners, I won't spoil anything, but Poison is a really excellent, super good, dark fantasy. And I mean dark, about this kind of surly teenage girl who like lives in a swamp, and she has to go through all of these like really spooky magical trials and travails to get to this really dark fairy kingdom to try to rescue her. I believe it's her little sister who's been kidnapped. And
Sounds
like
right.
there's amazing monsters, and like it's twists and turns, and the ending is like a wild ending that I won't spoil. But it was one of the first times, I was quite young when I read this. I was probably like 11 or 12, and I loved fantasy, but I didn't really read a lot of horror, and I was a bit of a scaredy cat. Um, and it was the first book that I read that had strong horror elements, and also, again, not to spoil anything, but does not have a traditional happy ending. Like it is not tied up with a bow at the end, but it felt so satisfying. And I was like, why am I enjoying this? I don't get it. And that really, I think, sowed some seeds for me. And then I was a little bit more open to trying books that were cross genre or different genres, and reading a bit more widely. But that is such like a tentpole moment for my creative development, because I just remember
Yeah.
like putting the book down in my school library, and just like sitting there for probably 5 minutes in silence, like wow.
Yeah, yeah. I was actually surprised. I went to Catholic school, so I was surprised that my school librarian had it. And I think it's because it had just first come out. Because then later on, I remember
Yeah.
it wasn't there. But yeah, I remember after that it was really difficult because I was like an advanced reader. My mom, I was like, can I read some of these other books? And she was like, I don't know if you should be reading Stephen King. So I can't remember which one, but it was like the fantasy like one, and I was able to get her because I had just read like The Hobbit, and I was like, well, this is the same thing. She goes, but it's Stephen King. But yeah, he did something very similar with that, and then I started to get into the first time, like the first Dark Tower. But that's what I liked, right? Was yeah, like you were saying, the blending. I totally forgot about that book. Yeah, somebody and I were just mentioning that. They're like, have you read this? I was like, oh my god, it's been so long. I'm gonna have to use my Audible credit today now on it.
Yeah, I should
But yeah, it
reread
was
it.
like really good.
I should reread it. It made such an impact on me. Like the fact that I have such a clear memory of so many of the scenes, like I've seen it in a movie, and I only
Yeah,
read once when I was so young. Like that really is a testament to a good book that stands the test of time for sure.
yeah. I just liked the different like how everything connected like as she's going through.
Mm-hmm.
I think of things like that, right? Where, like you're saying, that we're, I'm like, was always trying to do something similar to that. Like my current novella, I keep just wanting it to really flow with those different sections. I felt that was one that just did a really great job. Um, and you get to the end, and I don't know, it was really quick. It was one of the quicker reads I think I've had, like ever, particularly at that time period, though. Yeah, that was really good. I have to remember that once I
Yeah.
get done here. I'm gonna have to like put it right back down. It's so funny because my wife asked me about that. She's like, "Well, you're trying to read all these new authors and stuff." I go, "I really am." I go, "But sometimes it's just nice to go back to something you read." I like Audible now because I can go back and listen to them, and then I usually pick up something different, almost like the director's cut. I don't know, and especially books like I've been going back to some I haven't read since that time period. So it's kind of funny that you mentioned that. And I've been listening to them on Audible again, and some were not as good as I remember, but some were better than I remember. So
Yeah, definitely.
it's been nice. Yeah, it's been really cool. A great suggestion. I'll have to put that in like the notes or something.
Please do.
Uh,
I want everybody to read it.
so my favorite question though is to ask people about their works in particular. So we'll go with that third question. And what is your book Evocation about, and how did you come up with this idea?
So Evocation is the start of a urban fantasy romance series, and it follows a psychic medium who is living and working as a high-powered lawyer in Boston. His name is David, who realizes that he is subject to an ancestral curse, a deal with a demon, and the only two people that he can reach out to for help are his ex-boyfriend and secret society rival, and the ex-boyfriend's new witch wife. And
Boom.
it's a little bit of forced proximity in a haunted house, some secret society shenanigans, and of course, we discover big feelings along the way. And I love it very much. So basically, the series that it starts, the Summoner's Circle series, is all about the interconnected lives and loves of a group of magicians, mostly who are living in Boston. So it's like a larger cast. Everyone knows each other. It does kind of have that like X-Men soapy feeling of like, I've known you for years. We dated, we've broken up. I'm friends with your wife, who's like working with my sister, like all this kind of stuff. But I love those really entangled sort of larger casts, and it's a fun challenge to write a story like that. Um, and it really is just a love letter to so many things that I care about a lot. It's really just an excuse for me to continue to do research into like religion and magic and different living magical traditions in the world and the city of Boston and all kinds of things that I'm really really into. And it's a love story, as so many of my books are, and it really is kind of like a found family power of love story as well, which I never get tired of. I know
Yeah.
there's you can't tell me anything. I love them. So yeah, it's just me doing a lot of things that I really, really love in one book, and I'm so excited to share it.
That's awesome. I feel like there's a lot of cool stuff there. It's hard to unpack which one I want to talk about first. Let's just kind of talk. I don't want to like do spoilers, obviously, but like, what made you go with like a curse in terms of like your main character and having to deal with that type of problem?
I was into the idea of like a ticking clock because I think that always really, really helps a narrative, especially like
For
a
sure.
fantasy narrative, and especially one that is so in the weeds of like people's feelings and having conversations about relationships and things like that. And I think it just added a little bit more of a urgency to the story. But then also the curse, this I don't think is a spoiler because it's in the back copy, but the devil comes to call when David turns 30, and that's like a really interesting kind of season of life. And I turned 30 this fall, and I started writing this when I was like younger, so I was kind of like looking into the future. And so it is a little bit of like a quarter life crisis, millennial crisis vibe, but filtered through this kind of larger than life supernatural thing. So basically they have to figure out how to break this curse before his birthday, but also David has to go through a lot of personal development and painful growing edges and change to survive as well. And so I just thought that like, I love a Dr. Faustus story. I
Mm.
love the sins of the fathers being visited on the children. Like, you didn't make this deal, but you have to deal with it kind of energy.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
those are really, really interesting. And then giving it a timeline that was attached to like kind of a existential developmental moment in someone's life that quite literally could mean that you die. Like, just
Yeah,
felt fun and cool.
yeah. Well, I'm already feeling for your main character as somebody that had to work with their ex and then their new boyfriend. I definitely feel that whole
All right, you lived
that whole
it.
vibe. Yeah, I had to live that. So as soon as you said that, I was like, ooh, ooh, okay. So I definitely think you have some interesting plot developments there, like right off the bat. So that's really cool. Are you from Boston? Do you visit there a
Oh,
lot?
I lived in Boston for 4 years, and I'm
Oh,
still pretty close. I'm only an hour out of the city right now.
oh, cool.
Um, yeah, me and my fiance went there for our very first anniversary, and we fell in love with the city,
Oh, awesome.
and we ended up moving there. And it's just a city I never get tired of. I've lived in a lot of places in America since I was little. I've lived in Southern California, Western North Carolina, New Jersey, Connecticut, kind of all over. But Boston just kind of has this eternal charm to me. The history of the city is so rich. It really has its dark spots and its light spots, and every neighborhood has such a distinct personality. The architecture of Boston is also just really evocative. It's kind of hard not to get swept away and feel like there are magic down these little back alleys where you have like a glass high rise next to an old brownstone next to a Gothic church. Like, it's just really, really cool. And I never got tired of exploring the city. And I still love going to visit to go see my friends and to do research for the book and things like that. So um I think I love urban fantasy, and I grew up reading a lot of it.
Yeah.
I have such a nostalgia for that early aughts urban fantasy, like the Borderland, or not Borderland, Border Town series,
Mm.
uh, uh, the Dresden Files, Patricia Briggs, like
Oh, I love
things
Patricia.
things like that. I also read a lot of short stories, like YA short stories when I was younger, that were really in that kind of zeitgeist that I
Mm.
remember so vividly. And that was actually reading those short stories with a lot of Ellen Datlow anthologies, were some of the first times that I experienced the writings of authors who I grew then to really admire and read more of. Like, this was the first time I encountered Charles DeLint, Tanith Lee, Catherine Valenti,
Ooh.
was through these short story anthologies, and they were doing such cool stuff. So I've always loved urban fantasy, and I've always really wanted to do it and put my own spin on it and kind of approach the genre from a slightly different angle. And part of that was, a lot of times when you think of urban fantasy, especially that's set in America, it's usually in like New York or maybe Chicago or Seattle.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit less exploration of other cities. And I was like, well, Boston is a place that feels really rich and magical to me. So why don't I just write what I know and put it in Boston? So that was kind of how we got to this point. But it's also just a great excuse for me to spend more time in the city and learn more about it.
That's awesome. I just was curious because actually read several urban fantasies within the last, like, I would say, like year or so, where Boston was the city that it was set. So,
That's
and
awesome.
yeah, people did a really good job too. But I've seen some different cities like that pop up. Kevin Hearn, I used to live out in Phoenix, and it was so cool because he wrote the Iron Druid Chronicles, and Atticus first starts off in Tempe. And then, like, his favorite restaurants, Rula Bula, his favorite is the fish and chips. I was like, that's my favorite. And it was just so cool to get to explore the different places that Kevin had lived and stuff, and where he wrote his characters living. So it was just really neat. But I just think it's cool that people pick different cities than just New York City. And, and even like somebody was like, oh yeah, Chicago. And they did that. And I was like, oh. And then my buddy's like, was teasing him because we love urban fantasy. We read them together for book club. He goes, so do you think that they're passing Harry Dresden and this character just doesn't know it? Or like, I'm like, I don't know. So I tend to, for my urban fantasy, do the same thing. I tend to pick different places. I like the supernatural, like, kind of thing, where you just like, it's like more of a traveling one.
Oh yeah,
But I
that
like I like that trope
format
too.
is so fun.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Love
I always
that.
thought that was cool. But yeah.
Yeah.
Dean was just like always spoke to me. He was like my spirit animal.
He's
So
my favorite character too. My favorite
he's
character of the
awesome.
series. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. That is really neat. So I'll ask you this next question, then I got a couple of sub questions for you.
Sure, sure.
What types of magical powers and characters can we expect to see in the Summoner Circle series?
So the Summoner Circle series, something that I really love about it, in just my, geeky way, is that most of the magic that we see in the book is rooted in real world living traditions.
Mm.
And there's definitely artistic license, especially with things like the demon deal. Things are a little bit more larger than life. But it's we have characters who practice ceremonial magic based in Western esotericism. We have characters who practice Santeria, chaos magic, root work, tarot reading, astrology, all of these things that I have either experienced myself and practiced myself, or know folks who have practiced or have done research on. And I truly have a bottomless appetite to learn about magic and religion and spirituality in all of its forms. I've been that way since I was so tiny. I mean, I really, like, at the end of the day, I pretty much only care about like spirituality, art, and love. So I just cram as much of that as I can into these books. But yeah, that was really, really, really cool. And as the series goes on, we're going to be able to spotlight different traditions more and
Oh,
introduce
cool.
some new characters who do things in a different way. Like we meet like the Wiccan Coven in Salem in book two, a little bit about
Oh,
book
cool.
two. So just like all these things that I think are really, really cool. I mean, I've worked as a tarot reader for like 5 years. I've been reading for like 10 years. I'm close to people who are very serviceable astrologers and things like that. So a lot of the magic is rooted in that way, but it does come out kind of in these like fun, a little bit more competitive, a little bit more showy ways. If you put a bunch of magicians in a room together, it's probably going to get a little volatile, and that's part of what makes it fun. And then of course at the core of a lot of the drama in the book is this secret society in Boston, um which is primarily ceremonial magic. Think like a Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, like that kind of thing, Rosicrucianism, kind of that kind of influence that's just kind of been like synthesized down into my own little version of this little, boys club in Cambridge that meets in the basement underneath a Cantonese restaurant and is summoning demons. But it was really, really fun, and it was cool to be able to uh, not even necessarily imagine, because they do exist, but kind of project with my own imaginative energy what that kind of society might look in the modern day. So, like they're having conversations about like how many people can we afford to let into the society? Should we finally read some of these applications we get every year from qualified women? What kind of ritual should we be doing? What's the end goal? So that kind of inner machination, backroom dealing stuff is really, really fun for me. So there's also an element of that in here as well.
Oh, that's cool. Well, it sounds like you have quite a bit of depth going, kind of all around, which I think makes the world building a lot easier, right? Because it just feels when you're layering like that, I feel like my friend the other day, she was like, I just do it like a blanket. And I'm like, what do you mean? Because she, you know, crochets or whatever. And she's like, yeah, I just am going under and going over. And I was like, it blew my mind. I was like, yeah, I was like, that makes total
That'll
sense.
work.
You have this thread, this thread. And then all of a sudden you have a blanket when you're world building. I was like, why did I never think of that analogy before? But that when you're saying though, those kind of things, to me, that's what it seems like, as you're able to, pull those threads together for a really interesting, unique world and experience for readers, which is really awesome. Um, I have to say, like anytime somebody is doing something, I too love urban fantasy, but I don't want to just write another Dresden Files. I
Exactly.
love supernatural, but I don't want to just do that. So, like, I was just talking to Michael R. Fletcher and Crystal Matar about my novella, and I'm just like trying with the world to just same thing, right? Like to do the things that I like, but really still keep it urban fantasy. Um,
Hmm.
I'm a historian, so I love history.
Oh,
So I love
awesome.
those history, weird mysteries
Yeah,
and
yeah.
questions, and just weaving them together. So, yeah. So to me, when you're saying this, I'm like, oh, it just sounds so cool. And I think that's the thing that's cool about being an author, right, or a creator, is you get to take stuff that you love and then put your spin on it and to add depth to the genre.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
My ultimate hope with this series, like I got this question on a podcast a couple weeks ago, and about like, oh, are you like, is your first is your first order of operations goal to entertain or educate, or like where do you fall? And
Great
I
question.
Yeah, it was a really good question. It gave me a lot to think about, and I'll kind of mention my answer here as well. I want any reader that encounters my work to have a really fun ride. Like, I feel like I'm primarily a performer, primarily an entertainer. I want to create big sensations and big emotions for you and take you on the emotional roller coaster and give you beautiful things to look at and make it fun and make it sexy and make you feel something. And I really do approach it kind of in that spirit of play, which gives me a lot of freedom. But the wonderful thing about the Summoner Circle series is I hope that you can approach it with coming in with not much knowledge at all about these magical and spiritual traditions. And if you just want to have a good time and watch the magicians fight, like go to town. But if anyone is reading this book and they're like, oh, chaos magic, that's kind of cool. Like, I wonder how that works. I wonder like if there's literature on this or anything, you can kind of take the little grains of truth and the kernels in the book and go and explore more and see if it's something you might be interested in learning about. And that's really cool too. It's a cool opportunity I have as an author to just kind of introduce you to traditions or ideas that you might not have been familiar with before. And then if
Yeah,
they resonate, that's your little green flag to go explore.
I think that's such a great point that you make. And I guess I didn't really realize, like, I love people when they do that because then it makes me, I'm a huge academic. I love studying new things. I just was just talking to somebody the other day, and they kind of made like a presumption about something that we were talking about, and I was like, "Have you ever even talked to a person, from this religion or this way of life?" They're like, "No." I'm like, "Well, maybe you should," like,
Yeah.
because I'm like, I think that we have so many assumptions and biases and things, and I always tell my students, I'm like, the only way that you get over that is by literally just educating yourself. I said, it doesn't mean you have to believe that what I believe or what so and so or whatever. I said, but just educating yourself just takes away those biases and helps you to train yourself to be more accepting towards other people and different ideas. And that's why I love reading, though. And I love teaching people how to read and getting kids involved in reading. And I think my parents, like, I was raised Catholic, but they did such a good job being like, yeah, read that, read that, read that, and
Love that.
it was cool to to experience. And I'm sure at times my questioning nature drove my mom crazy having to answer all the questions. But it was cool. Like, I went to a school where they invited people from different religions and from different ways of life, and you got to like actually talk to them. But I think for my writer brain, that just like really, I never had this. My curiosity is never sated, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
as a writer, I feel like reader and a writer, I feel like it's just helped me grow as an individual. So I think that's really cool, is that you're leaving breadcrumbs and things for people to build off of themselves and research. And yeah, that's just really cool. So,
Thanks.
and I guess a couple people now, I'm thinking, we had this conversation recently. I was like, I guess I don't mean to teach in my books, but maybe I just subliminally do it. I don't know.
I think we all do.
Yeah, I
Excuse
didn't
me. I think
realize
we all
that.
do. There's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, but it just, I don't know. No, I've never realized it, and nobody's ever really said that to me before, or put it in the right context. So I think that that's really neat. Um, so that kind of leads us into like our next question. So what urban fantasy tropes did you focus on for your world building and your story the most?
That's a great question. I think it's more like, I guess it is an urban fantasy trope. It's a kind of character that can show up. Um, I feel like so all of these books in this series are multi POV and kind of follow a group of people, but each of the books spotlights kind of one character's big moment, magically and personally and romantically and otherwise. It's kind of their moment of change, and that's where we meet them. So this is David's book. He's going through it. And David is really a celebration, but an inversion as well of some urban fantasy tropes, because on the one hand, he's kind of like an overpowered build. Like he's like rich, he's hot, he's psychic, he has the car, like he's very charismatic and charming and powerful and like born into privilege and status. And so he has a lot of those slightly larger than life elements that make him very, very fun to write. It's a little bit of a fantastical kind of projection and that kind of things. But a lot of what he goes through is really undercutting this image that he's tried to project of himself, of being like this really powerful, alluring golden boy. He has to dig up a lot of trauma and deal with a lot of his bad coping skills, and he's a recovering alcoholic in this book and
Mm.
is really dealing with that and his relationship to alcohol and other people. And again, not to give away too much of the book, but a lot of the challenge that he's faced with in this book is like, you can have all the money and the power and the status and the cars in the world, but if you are not allowing yourself to be in intimate relationship with other people, you are going to live a very diminished life. But being in intimate relationship with other people is terrifying, and it
Yeah.
does take a lot of work, and it does take a lot of humility, which is not something that he has a lot of when we first meet him. So it was a fun kind of celebration of, like, the hero or the love interest in these stories that's just kind of a little bit too perfect on the surface, but like we love it because we go to the stories for fantasy and we want to be swept
Yeah.
away. But then doing a little bit of deeper character work on that archetype of person to be like, what's your damage though? What makes you sad? What do you need to change about yourself? And that was really fun. So I do put my characters through a lot. I do kick them when they're down sometimes, but it is for their own good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's another way you can really, help that impetus for change, right? In terms of your characters. I had two of my alpha readers get back to me, and I was like, yeah, I feel kind of bad sometimes for this character. I'm like, oh, talk about kicking somebody when they're down. But then again, right, that's how you get, I think, the better story. But
Absolutely.
I had somebody ask me, they're like, "Do you ever feel bad?" I'm like, I had a kid ask me recently at school. I go, not usually. I go, but with this guy, I do. I do feel bad. I feel kind of guilty, but I think it works out better out for everybody in the long run. So I think they make a good point with that one. Oh, David, now I have to see your pain. But I think that's a good point though that you make, right? Is it's not just seeing people in pain, it's seeing how they deal with it, their
Absolutely.
triumphs, and it's easier to see someone else, right, in a fantastical setting, do that than our own self sometimes. But yeah, that's those little lessons you can learn right along the way, or teach people, that if you're going through this, there are things you can do. Like you might not be dealing with demons or whatever, any of your urban fantasy tropes or magic or whatever, like Harry Dresden or any of them, right? But sometimes our own demons, are quite scary or scarier
Yeah.
than the fantastical ones in the books, right? So I think anytime you can teach somebody something like that, that was like supernatural. I was like, it just teaches you to keep going, right? No matter
Yeah.
what crap you or your loved ones have to deal with, and to stick together. I think so. I think those themes are really cool. So yeah, that's awesome though. So I didn't ask this explicitly, but I'm kind of curious.
Sure.
In terms of your themes, though, like what kind of themes? 'Cause I've been thinking about this recently with my own work, and my friend asked me, goes, "You have some themes here that I don't even think you realize that you were trying
Hmm.
to convey." So I'm kind of curious at what were some themes that you were trying to, kind of get your reader to understand or to learn, necessarily through the series itself.
It's a great question. And I really resonate with what you just said about sometimes, and I'm a very thematically driven writer. I always say I can't really write the book well until I know what I'm quote unquote trying to say. But it sometimes takes me to the end of the book or even reflecting on it now in these conversations that I have with people during promotion to be like, oh wow, I guess I really was exploring that. I guess I did have something to say. And so it is really cool and interesting how even your own work can continue to surprise you years down the
Yeah,
line. I would say that from where I stand right now, evocation is really, I said it a little bit earlier, but like it is really a power of love story. A lot of the themes have to do with building community, with second chances, and with kind of the redemption that is offered to us through love that we have to really work for. And I'm really into those things. I really believe in those things a lot. Like, and again, this is not a spoiler. This is we've been talking about it since we announced the book, but it is a polyamorous love story. The end game is kind of this trio of people who all have a really unique connection to each other, who are all holding loving space for each other and learning how to be close without hurting each other. And sometimes that is the hardest thing. I mean, you can love someone down bad, you can love them hard. But sometimes the closer you get, the more opportunity you have to harm each other, whether
Yeah.
you mean to or not. Sometimes that proximity can just give us more opportunities to be hurt. So this story is really about broken people working towards that love and that redemption and that intimacy, but realizing that it is a lot of work. But also, what is more transformative and powerful than the love that our loved ones and our friends and our spouses offer us? Like, that's kind of
Yeah.
it. That really comes down to that.
Yeah. 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 I've actually been thinking about that recently based off of a celebrity, let's say, who has said some things that I didn't really like. And I felt like it encompassed my wife as well, who was a very accomplished individual. So I was like, why am I so defensive lately? And I was like, because I was like, but that's where I was like, kind of discovering my own themes, right? And I was like, well, I'm pretty defensive of her because of what she's done for me,
Yeah.
and I was just talking to a buddy of mine about this, and he's like, "Why are you so angry at this individual? Like, he didn't call your wife out." I go, "But I felt like he did, and I felt
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I said I just feel angry because I said and I was thinking about it yesterday. And I was like, I think it's because of the changes that she didn't make me make, but the changes in which I made to
Mhm.
be who I am now. And I like who I am now so much more than who I used to
Yeah.
be. And I really enjoyed who I used to be. But I mean, without her, I wouldn't have had the impetus to make those changes. So I was like, yeah, I'm a little defensive, of
Yeah.
my wife
There's
and my
there's a
life that she's given me. So
I love that. There's like I don't even know if it's a meme. I think it's an actual quote that goes around with different pictures and stuff on the internet, but I always think about this, and it's that to be loved is to be changed quote.
yeah,
And sometimes you'll see it with like like a child's toy that's been like loved threadbare. But yeah,
yeah.
to be loved is to be changed, truly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And like now with my son too, like that's like somebody said something. They were just like joking, but they were like, I don't know. My wife was somewhere and she was kind of worried about like somebody was following her or something. I don't know, wherever they were. And then we had all gotten together, and a friend of ours like made a comment. They're like, I would have been fine. Dan's here, And my wife was like, yeah, I have no worries when he's here. And I was just like, well, why? And she was like, well, I know that you would just handle it. And I'm like, okay. And I
All
was like,
right.
yeah. And I'm like, and but it was just but the confidence that she has, that I will handle it, in case there's like an issue or something like that. I just thought was kind of funny. But she had my son in her arms. She was like, ain't nobody touching this when you're around. And I was like, okay, that's fair. So it was really funny. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think that the change is I've been thinking a lot about that recently. And yeah, like just in terms of with writing and I do have a character that I do want people to see that he does change for certain reasons, but you kind of blew my mind because I feel like it's not really it's not really the story that's happened to him. It's more the people that are there. So I think
Exactly.
I need to do a better job of showing that, if that makes sense. Yeah, because I think they're really the change that has occurred and not necessarily the stuff he's gone through, if that makes sense. uh,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah, so that's got my mind a whirling here, which is really before the old writing time. Well, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I love the themes that you've mentioned so far. I feel like there's so much for readers to connect with. Yeah, I'm really interested to see what David is going to do and the stuff that he goes through. It sounds very interesting. Um, and okay, so this actually goes, this is why I asked this question, because I actually saw the sixth one before this. So this is really one that I'm interested in, especially now with the answers you've already given. So what steps did you take to make your urban fantasy world and your characters feel real to your readers? I know David and already feels real to me, but what steps were you purposely going through to try and make them feel real to your readers?
I think a lot of this comes down to just like classic good writing advice that you have to continually remind yourself to follow. Like, specificity is really the soul of something feeling real. And you don't want to, overburden the audience with too many details when
Yeah,
it's appropriate to what they need to know. But when it comes to building out characters and the city and the magic system, like small details can go a really long way. So just adding a little bit of inside baseball sometimes really helps when it comes to like explaining what's going on magically. And I put in a lot of details about neighborhoods in Boston that I liked, and cafes and restaurants that I had been to that I enjoyed. And I do think not being afraid to put a little bit of yourself in the book, if you feel like safe and comfortable doing so, can really help as well. Like drawing from personal experience, especially when you're writing about things like friendship and love and career and self-esteem, and like these things that can feel kind of vulnerable and exposing. A lot of times when you're writing and you kind of feel that like, oh, I'm getting a little bit too close to something that feels too real and too exposing, sometimes it's good to sit with that and be like, is there things here that I can use that might be helpful to someone else and might make these characters feel more grounded and real? And do I feel like I'm ready to share a little bit about what I've experienced and what I think about the world? So I think those technical details really help, and not being afraid to write from experience and write from deeply held beliefs can be really, really helpful. Um, and then really beyond that, it's just a lot of massaging to make sure that it's all cohesive, and a lot of writing and rewriting. And, I notoriously back myself into corners with like my climaxes and my ending, where I'm like, I know this is how I want it to end. It's going to be great. And then it's like, okay, you've got to get us there. You've got to reverse engineer the steps it takes to get there. So I went through like, spoiler alert, it's a romance. David doesn't die. They do get him out of this curse. It's complicated, and you should read how they do it. It's really cool and fun. Please buy the book, but he doesn't die. But the way that we got out of that curse, I probably changed it 4 times over many
Mm.
years.
Yeah, yeah.
Never really felt totally right. And I have so many memories of being on the phone with my then boyfriend, now fiance, being like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I wrote myself into a corner, and he'd be like, all right, let's workshop it. What are your options? You've got to get to the ending somehow. So I think just also remaining flexible and agile, and not being afraid to kind of radically reinvent what you're doing, or radically
Yeah.
reframe some of the decisions you've made. Because I can get very attached to early writing decisions that I make, and a couple revisions later, it's just not the right choice anymore because the book changes around you. So
Yeah.
that's kind of some of my advice, and some of the principles that I followed when I was writing this book, to try to make it feel real and grounded and emotionally resonant, while still being like rompy and fun, and having those kind of showboaty moments that we go to fantasy for.
I'm like totally blanking on the author's name, but I just, oh my gosh. I think it's like Melissa. I think the book's called Dark and Blade. So it was like a 99-cent thing. And talk about like romance, like it was one of the best romanticities I've ever read. And I was listening to Audible too. And I mean, it was just like, it was so good, but it like really made me like rethink, um, like you were saying, like from experiences and stuff. And I was like, oh, I have to like really rethink of how I'm writing relationships, because I felt so much from her writing. It was just so good. Yeah, it was just really, it was very, it was like almost like an existential experience when I was like reading and listening to it, because it was almost like I was being taught how to write relationships, if that makes sense. So now I'm kind of going back over, like kind of like you were saying, I'm like, okay, like why do I want the character to do this or to feel this? And when are the characters, like yours, like when am I feeling what David's going through the most? That's kind of interesting from a reader and a writer's perspective. So I think it's just really cool to see those moments for authors like yourself, where you're like, oh, this was really good. This, is most likely pulled from, a real source, as people like to say. But I think it really, I think it really pops up in your writing, and really pops off the page more when you're, pulling from those types of experiences, if that makes sense. So
No,
I
for
think
sure,
that's
for sure.
very, very valuable advice. So, uh, yeah, I was just like astounded with a couple of different books I've read recently, where I was just like, oh man, I like really need to get the tissues and kind of like think about my life choices.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
I shouldn't be listening to certain Audible books on the way to work. I listen on the way home now. Let's just say
I
that
uh
much.
I have like a hybrid job, so I go into the office part of the month, and I usually have my little like podcasts or audiobooks in when I'm typing away at my desk. And I've definitely had to be like, well, I'm gonna go in the bathroom and cry now. Like you gotta be careful about what books you're listening to on the clock. But yeah,
Yeah.
I feel that. But you know, good literature makes you feel deeply, so it's not a bad thing.
Yeah. And well, that's like kind of more, I feel like what I've like been yearning for, if that makes sense. I feel like after you read so many books, it's like, I don't know, after a while, you're just like, that's why I think I want something new, and I want to see people's unique ideas. I think the more I've started writing over the last like decade, I've wanted more unique perspectives. I wanted to see, people like you're saying with yours, like you're taking urban fantasy and, looking through it from a slightly different lens. And I don't know, those things are just really exciting to me. And I always get a lot more out of it, I feel like, than the same old, same old. The classics are the classics, but I really enjoy a lot of new things that people are doing because I feel like writing's changed a lot, if that makes
Oh yeah.
sense. And I feel, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like people are maybe they're not trying to make you cry, but they're doing a better job of it, I feel like recently. Um, but yeah, I just think it makes, reading more exciting. So, and makes me, want to explore your world and your characters more. So I think it's
Thanks.
awesome. So this one's hard always for me to ask because somebody asked me this a couple of years ago, and I'm like, I don't know. It's like picking your favorite child. But if you can meet one of your characters from your world, who would it be and why?
That's a great question. There's some really beloved characters of mine in this, but also like I love David, but I don't think we would get along in real life at all. Like I think if we were, locked in an escape room and forced to talk, we might
It's
we
a
might get
great
through it.
question.
But it's like, what situation would you actually just want to like chill with somebody with?
Yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
there's so many. This is a hard question. This is a hard question. Moira would be wonderful because Moira is like wonderful to everyone. She's the third point in the triangle, and she's very insightful and very compassionate and very talented, and just has a very easy time making friends. So I feel like she's the best bet. Like she's the safe option because she's just lovely to most people she meets. And that's kind of her special gift. But I would also like to maybe hang out with Anthony. He's a side character in this. He's one of the society members. He's like from a big Italian Boston family, like a weightlifter who works at a bank. Just kind of like a bro's bro in many ways, but he is also just like really loves his friends, kind of has a volatile dating life, so he always has a really good gossip, and he's always learning. He's always got a scheme. He's always learning some new magical technique he wants to try out, and just like I feel like he'd be a good time at the party but could also hold a good conversation. So I'm going to choose either Moira or Anthony, probably.
That's a great answer. I had somebody a while back, I forget who it was, and they were like had these like crazy, it was a fantasy author, like I would say like traditional fantasy, but it was so funny where they like picked like out of all these crazy cool characters from like our perspective, they picked the one that like you just would not expect. And I was like, why? And they're like, very unique perspective. I had to, really try to get into the character's head. So to me, it's always fun to, because some people I expect to say something and then they completely change my mind, but it always makes you think about their characters in a different light. So I always find it an interesting one. So I'm glad that my friend suggested that. Well,
It's
that
a good
sounds
one.
awesome. Definitely want to meet him myself now. Sounds really cool. Sounds like we get along.
Cool.
So for that last one, do you have any news updates or current projects that you can share with us?
Yes, so I am currently working on book 2 in the Summoner Circle series. This is going to be a 4-book series, and we are shooting to have one book out a year.
Oh,
We'll
cool.
see how my brain and deadlines in life go, but we're on track right now, so we're going to keep that train going. But I'm also really excited about the next series that I'm working on with Orbit. So
Oh,
Summoner
cool.
Circle is Angry Robot. That's the Wizards books, and then I do Gothic Romance with Orbit,
Oh, cool.
and I'm developing this trilogy for Orbit. The first book is called Savage Blooms, and it comes out in fall of 2025. And it's kind of a folkloric, erotic fantasy romance set on in Scotland. And this is like heavily playing with like fairy folklore and fairy magic and folklore from the region, and it's deliciously angsty. If anyone has read A Dowry of Blood by me, and likes kind of that angstier, moodier, gothic feel, this is people crying on the moors and hooking up in castles and yelling at each other, and like it's a really fun time. And of course, it's all about love and desire and intimacy, and it will have a happy ending, but it's a wild ride. So if you're like a fan of Wuthering Heights or anything like that, you might like this new trilogy. So those are the two things I'm cooking, and it's fun. It's like two different sides of my brain. It's like on this side, it's like lightning and rain and Sarah McLachlan is playing, and then on the side of my brain it's like, ooh, we're chilling in Boston doing some magic. Like it's yin and yang, so it all works out.
Well, that's awesome. I have to say, I love your titles, by the way. Like, just flow
Thanks.
together really nicely and make me just immediately wonder, like, oh, what's the book about? Like, what are the characters going to be like? So, I just wanted to point that out real quick to you. So,
Thank
that was really
you.
cool. Well, Saint, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. You really got my brain a whirling before my time. I'm working on a couple things, like I said, in between. So I know I'm gonna, whatever I do, it's gonna be good because I feel like I got a really good warm up of reflecting and thinking about things that you said. But anytime you want to come back on, for those future books, Orbit, or whatever, or book 2 for Summer Circle, just let me know, and I'll be more than happy to get you on, for whenever you're ready to go, or if you want to come chit chat. I'll have some seminars and stuff hopefully coming up this summer with
That's
different authors.
awesome.
So yeah, I feel like you'll fit really well in with a couple that I have coming in for season 4. So it'll be kind of cool to to see what you guys have to say ahead of time, and yeah, it'd be really neat and just a fun conversation. So I'll be sending that info to Caroline and a couple people for you. So,
Thank
but
you
other than
so
that, if
much.
there's anything, yeah. If there's anything I can do in the meantime, to help you out with anything or get the word out, you guys just let me know, and I will do my best and blast it from the mountaintops and all my channels for you. So, but I
Fabulous.
really hope that that this that this book and both of your series go really well. Good luck. I look forward to reading them. I have to say, you really got my interest peaked. But yeah, other than that, I hope you have a great rest of the day and good luck with the rest of your promotion tour.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful day,
Yeah,
and thank you for
you
listening,
too.
guys.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.